Hello and welcome to episode 5 of my 12-string guitar build. What I'm preparing to do here is to drill holes through to where the pickup cavities will be routed, so that I can feed the cables through later on. As you'll see, this is actually going to be rather a waste of time. They look pretty though. I mentioned in the last episode that I'd have to round off the joint between the neck and the body, and so here I'm starting to do that with my rasps. So now I'm preparing the top to go on the body, and I've found that because this side wall ended up being sanded down and in the end is a little bit less than anticipated, that means that this part, the through neck, is higher than the side walls. So what I've decided to do is to route out a sort of large groove here, which that will slot into, and allow me to glue the whole thing onto both the sides and the through neck. That seems to fit okay now. Here I'm gluing a couple of extra pieces to the side of the centre block inside the body, because I found that it was too narrow to route out the pickup cavities and then have enough wood left next to it to screw the mounting rings into. This is why I said earlier that drilling the holes for the wires was a waste of time. Now I'm drilling out the holes for the tuners on the headstock. I drilled through until the centre point of the drill bit pierced through to the other side, and then I drilled through from the other side in order to try to avoid any tear out. So now that I've got my holes in the right place, I'll be able to design the end of the headstock. I deliberately left quite a lot of extra room there to make sure that I could do this later on and decide what shape I want the end to be. I'm starting to work on the inlays now, and I've decided that I'm going to do a bit of a complicated set of inlays. So what I've done is I've drawn all this out. It's sort of based on a tree of life idea, but with a little bit of a mixture of different concepts, because there are a couple of birds in there. There's my oak leaf, which is my standard kind of signature inlay, and an acorn there, and a sun, which is a little bit of a nod to the Sunray guitar that I made a little while ago, my bass. So the first job is to carefully cut out the holes, and what I've decided to do for this is I think I'm going to cut the holes in the fretboard and then shape the pieces to go in there, and I think that might be a better way than doing it the other way around. I think it's probably easier to shape the inlay pieces to fit in a hole than vice versa. But I'm going to start with all of the twig pieces and do all of those first, and then work on the individual inlays. So how I'm starting to do this is just with a scalpel. I've already made a little bit of a start by cutting the outlines. I found that my smallest chisel is a 2mm, but that's too big to work on this part. So I'm going to just carry on with the scalpel and just try and take out the wood very slowly in little slivers. So I'm now working on the inlays, and first of all I'm doing the twigs or branches, and I cut them out as you saw. Now what I'm doing is making small pieces of the paduk from the side of the body, the same wood as that, carving them to shape with a mixture of tools, starting with my disc sander and spindle sander and going on to various different files as necessary, and then just gluing them in place. I've managed to make this out of one piece, which is much quicker. Here I'm cutting out the lines for the sunrays, which I did using my scalpel and chisel. This took quite a lot of time as well. So I've cut out all of my inlays now, and next I'm going to make the holes for them to go into. So what I'm going to do first is to score around the edge of the pieces with a scalpel blade. So put it in position, just hold it, and then not too hard, because I'm just scratching the surface a bit. Score around. I don't want it to be too deep, because I might go outside a little bit, and I want it to be shallow enough to be sanded out. It's just to get it visible for when I will actually cut the hole out. You may not even be able to see it from there, but there is a very faint outline of the inlay there, which is sufficient for me to use carefully to start drilling it out. So I have a 2mm router bit which I bought recently. Before that I bought a 3mm one of these and a 1mm one. The 3mm bit worked very well. The 1mm one broke almost as soon as I tried to use it, so I thought I'd try the 2mm bit in order to be able to make things a bit more finely, but hopefully it won't break. Right, that's about as close as I think I can get with the crocks on. I put a little bit of dust in the bottom to provide a bit of a bed for the inlay. I put some super glue on there and then just put it in, and that now fits pretty well. It's a little bit proud, but that'll be sanded down, and later on when it's all dried and when it's been sanded down, I'll check to see if there are any gaps around the edge that I need to fill with a little bit more dust and glue. So that's the end of the 5th episode, and I just wanted to say a couple of words at the end, because it may be that some of you look at this and think that you wouldn't be able to do inlays like this, and I just want to say that you're probably wrong. I wouldn't really have expected to be able to do all of these a little while ago, maybe a month ago, but I think the key elements are patience and planning. Patience really speaks for itself. I started working on these inlays about 3.5 weeks ago. Obviously I have a full-time job, so I'm not, that doesn't mean that I spent 3 weeks working solidly on these inlays, but I have spent quite a lot of time on them, and that's where the patience comes in really. The planning comes in because I started out by making up a full-sized copy of the fretboard, just drawing it out on a couple of sheets of paper, and designing the inlays. So I drew that out, I had some ideas. It was essentially based on a kind of tree of life, and the thing that prompted me to do it was actually the fact that I had a little bit of tear out on a couple of the frets up here on the slots, which I wanted to hide. I may have gone a bit over the top in doing that, but never mind. Anyway, so I drew it out on here, and then I drew them out on the fretboard, and then I just got stuck in basically. And so I did the branches first, and then for some of the other inlays, for some of them I could do it relatively easily. I mean, the two cherries here were just I think an 8mm drill bit and 2 holes that I made there. For some of the more complicated ones, what I did was I went online, I did a bit of searching for images, and then I found some images that were close to the sort of things that I had in my mind, printed them out, and then I used those to guide myself in drawing on paper again the outlines of the inlays that I wanted to make. And then I think you saw the rest in the video, so I stuck them on the mother of pearl and used a jeweller's saw to cut them out. And another thing, 2 of the main tools that I used in this process were hand tools of the jeweller's saw and a scalpel. I also used my Proxon multi-tool for cutting out a lot of the inlay holes, and that worked very well with a 2mm bit. And both the jeweller's saw and the scalpel, firstly, they break, and you must not stress about that, it doesn't matter. If it breaks too often, it probably means you're applying too much pressure with either of the tools. You don't need to apply a lot of pressure, so ease off a bit, let the tool do the work. With the scalpel you tend to have to press it a bit. And I would guess that I broke about 8 or 10 jeweller's saw blades, cutting out the various inlays on here. And I think I broke 3 or 4 scalpel blades. The thing to do with those is just buy them in large quantities. I buy 50 at a time. I've got a box of 100 scalpel blades. I had a pack of 50 jeweller's saw blades. Just use them. Make sure that you protect yourself enough when you're using them so that if they break and ping out, they're preferably not going to go in your eyes or anything like that. But past that, don't sweat it. And it just takes time. I also experimented with different ways of doing the inlays in terms of, do I do the inlay first and then cut the hole to fit the inlay, or do I cut the hole first and then cut the inlay to fit in the hole? In the end, I think it's easier to cut the inlay first and then cut the hole to suit it. The reason is that I think that it's easier to get what you want if you cut the inlay and then you cut the hole to match, and that I did, as you saw in the video, by just using the scalpel to score around the edge of the piece. It's a little bit fiddly because you have to make sure that the piece doesn't move too much, but then you can always adjust afterwards, and for all of the complex inlays, probably for all of them in fact, except the ones that I just drilled out, I had to do a certain amount of extra work to get them to fit properly in the end. And then also don't worry if you have little gaps, because you can just fill them with a bit of dust and super glue is what I used, just dust and super glue. I have some little boxes where I've collected up fine dust when I've been sanding with like 320 or 400 grit, and that comes in useful. So I have a few different types of wood dust in little boxes, and so I had some ebony dust, and I used that to just fill any holes around these. And really, okay, I'm going to have a quick look. Even knowing that they're there, I can barely see them at this distance, so it's absolutely fine. Obviously, if you're using a different coloured fretboard, a lighter colour fretboard, it's more difficult to match the colour of the wood. But that's one of the advantages of using ebony, because it's close to black, so when you mix the dust with super glue, it tends to darken the colour of it, so with the ebony that doesn't matter. So there we go. This was the 5th video in the series. As I've said earlier, I'm not doing videos for all of the stages, so I'm not going to be doing a video on, for example, the fretwork, because that's all standard stuff. I probably will do a video on the staining of the top and the back, and possibly on the way that I'm doing the electronics. So those will maybe come in a month or so. In the meantime, if you're thinking of doing some inlays, but you're afraid of the complexity or the difficulty, just get stuck in and do it. Have fun and enjoy it. See you in the next video. Bye bye.